how just are renewable technologies? That's an interesting question. Well, renewable technologies, I think, has to be seen in two different ways. Renewable technologies can be seen in the bigger renewable energy projects, such as your solar farms, your wind farms, and those can contribute to increasing energy access to those that do not have access. But I think renewable energies also have to be seen in the context of small projects like mini grids, solar home systems, and smaller renewable technologies. Well, renewable energies can be a solution, but we need to be careful of how we roll out, or we need to be careful of how we develop these technologies. So, in as much as it can be a solution, it needs to be seen more holistically. One, are we meeting the energy needs of women and men? I think it needs to be also women and men. And at household level, are we meeting those energy demands and energy needs by providing these renewable solutions, the renewable technologies? Oftentimes, as the continent, we tend to have an open door policy with accepting renewable technologies from the developed countries. And we don't question if this actually meets the demands of energy for our rural households. And that becomes problematic because we have a low uptake of technologies that do not meet the needs of our households, or do not meet the needs of the communities and and women in particular. Because as we know, men and women have different energy needs. Men may need energy, especially in a rural setting. Men need energy, for example, watching television. Men may need energy, for example, so that they can read the newspaper, as opposed to women. Women would need energy for more productive activities like taking care of children, cooking for the household. So those kinds of dynamics have to be understood before we roll out renewable energy technologies at a local level. At a more macro level, it's a different question altogether, because you're looking at big solar plants and big wind plants. For the most part, renewable energies have been small, isolated projects that are mostly driven by developed countries through pilot projects or through civil society organizations like Energia, which has worked a lot in the continent in Africa. So it's been isolated projects, but many countries are beginning to integrate renewable energy through the off-grid and mini-grids into their national grids. So it depends on the context, it depends on the area, it depends on the interests, it depends on the development priorities of that country, but we are beginning to see renewable energy technologies at a local scale being used a lot more, and we're beginning to see that it's accepted a lot more as well in some areas. So it actually varies. If you look at our leaders, we need champions. We need champions who can champion the cause, you know, and promote the use of renewable energies in their homes. For example, we could start there. Let's have our leaders say, I'm using a solar water system, hot water system, for example, and it works. So we need our leaders to take a very active role and promote the use of renewable energies. There's a lot of new developments happening in Africa. A lot of houses are being built at the moment. That kind of education is required at that level, so that we can show that they can also use renewable technologies, combine it with the grid, so that they can reduce their cost, for example. Because I think the cost argument works a lot, especially now. I think it's important before we design our technologies, renewable energy technologies, to look at the local context, to look at who are the users of these technologies, and what do they need this technology for. So if that kind of research is done, whether it's through gender disaggregated data of the energy sector, or whether it is through gender audits of the energy sector, those kinds of processes are required so that you develop technologies that meet those kinds of needs. However, when you do see that the uptake is low, I think it's important to go back to the drawing table and ask yourself, why is this not happening? Why am I not having in my solar home system? Why is the take-up for solar home systems so low? Why is the take-up for an improved stove so low? And go back to the users and ask them, and collaborating in a collaborative manner, try to find out what is the best technology suited for this kind of community, for this kind of households.
So you're saying the knowledge also on an academic level is there, and civil society or critical research institutes are already doing a lot, but the political decision makers are not open to take this in and to take this into consideration?
There's a huge gap, I say, with energy planning. Energy planning is, when there's energy planning at a country level taking place, you tend to see that there's more consideration of the different big energy users. So you tend to get energy planning considerations of energy users from commercial sector, from mining, from the bigger urban residential users, big industries. So I think the whole planning process has very little considerations for social aspects and gender aspects. There's a realization from many African governments and civil society as a whole that climate change is certainly the biggest development challenge we've ever had to face in many years. And responding to climate change through either mitigation and reducing our emissions or through adaptation measures is critical. But what is also important and what is emerging is that climate change is seen now as a developmental challenge, and which will affect all sectors: energy, agriculture, water, and it needs to be seen. And I think we're glad that our governments, African governments, have taken a bold stand, and they actually have a firm position that we need to respond to climate change. Whether we're going to reduce our emissions or we're going to adapt, but we need to respond to climate change. It needs to be seen in that context. So as we respond to climate change at a global level, we are required as a continent to reduce our emissions. And Africa is emitting the least emissions as a continent. And reducing our global emissions therefore means, do we have a right to develop? From the perspective of energy, we've seen results that women travel longer distances to collect fuel, and that becomes a problem because they have to collect fuel from longer distances. There's issues of safety, issues of security. The time that they spend collecting fuel wood is a lot longer, and they wish they could use that time to empower themselves as women, to empower themselves as individuals. So it has an impact at a household level, also for that particular individual, because they don't have time to develop themselves or engage in political activities or engage in programs that can enrich the individual. So in a way, because of that distance that they have to travel, women and men and children in many cases who also collect fuel would have been impacted at a local scale. Well, renewable energies potentially can be a solution, provided it's done the right way. And we've seen a lot of pilot projects, we've seen a lot of small projects at a local level that have the objective of reducing the time that women spend collecting fuel and children spend collecting fuel. So in the form of either improved stoves, or in the form of hot bags, or in the form of solar home systems, we have seen that renewable energies can have a positive impact. However, it needs to be looked at and seen that it actually meets the needs of those communities, of those people, that it actually improves their livelihood, because we don't want to provide renewable energies for the sake of providing renewable energies. We want to provide renewable energy so it can lift them out of poverty, and so that it can improve their livelihoods, and so that it can empower the communities as well. I think there needs to be some sort of a strategic partnership between civil society and our leaders and government, a healthy relationship between civil society and government, so that we can use the resources from civil society, whether it's skills, whether it's knowledge, whether it's research, whether it's their ability to mobilize communities, whether it's their ability to build capacity of communities. There is a strength in working with civil society, and I think what we need is that healthy relationship between civil society and for government to actually acknowledge that there is a strength in working with civil society organizations, particularly local civil society organizations. But there's also another key component here which is often left out, which is the research institutions. Research institutions play a very important role because they provide that kind of evidence-based kind of research that we also require in order to inform our policies, in order to inform our decision making. And as well as working with the actual users, the communities, whether it's through community-based organizations or individual communities, whether it's working through traditional leadership. Traditional leaders are also very important when it comes to local acceptance of renewable energy technologies as well, because they have a strong voice in a village setting, for example, where they can actually influence some of these or uptake of renewable technologies. So all those different players are very important, and it's not just the role of the state to roll out renewable technologies, but it's also the role of non-state actors, that is civil society, traditional leaders, academic institutions, research institutions, and the communities.